Shall we start, sir?
Yes, please.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I heartily welcome all of you in the Language Online Lecture Series Day 6 in the second session. Today we have internationally acclaimed guest with us. At the outset, we, the team of Langlit, need to thank all the participants who have joined with us by logging Zoom application regularly and those who are watching and enjoying with us live on Facebook and YouTube channel Langlist Educators. We have been receiving overwhelming response from all over India and abroad. Nationally and internationally acclaimed academicians are going to deliver their talks on various aspects of language and literature. I assure you, I will try my best to accommodate most of you during this lockdown period. In addition to that, it's not the end of lecture series, it's just a new beginning. We will arrange such lecture series every now and then. We are giving unique certificates to each and every participant by adding the entire speaker's photo on it after 30th of April or 3rd of May. Our designer is working on the certificate. We very soon you will receive the Google form link, but participants need to fill the Google form first and then send their Zoom participation screenshot or YouTube channel Langlitz Educator subscription screenshot to and send it to the email ID elanglitmotivators@gmail.com. Kindly keep in touch. Don't forget to subscribe the channel so that you will get further notification. So let's come together, learn, unlearn, and relearn. Friends, uh, we have with us a well-known internationally and nationally academicians, a bilingual writer, translator, editor, blogger, and researcher, Professor Sachin Ketkar sir, who is based in Baroda, Gujarat. His collection of Marathi poetry are जर संधानाच्या ब्लॉगवरचे काही अंश published in 2010, भिंतीशिवायच्या खिडकीतून डोकावताना published in 2004, and his poems have been translated into Gujarati, Hindi, Urdu, Malayalam, and Telugu. चांगल्या कवितेवरची स्टॅट्युटरी वॉर्निंग, समकालीन मराठी कविता, जागतिकीकरण आणि भाषांतर is a collection of Marathi articles on contemporary Marathi poetry, globalization, and translation, which was published in 2016. His books in English include Skin, Span, and Other Fake Encounters, selected Marathi poems in translation, published in 2011, Migrating Words, Reflections on Indian Translation Studies, published in 2010, A Dirge for the Dead Dog and Other Incantations, published in 2003. He has extensively translated present-day Marathi poetry, and most of which is collected in the anthology Live Update, an anthology of recent Marathi poetry published, edited by him in 2005. Apart from rendering the 15th century Gujarati poet Narsimha Mehta for his doctoral research, he has also translated numerous modern Gujarati writers like Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, Bhupen Kharka, Jayant Khatri, Rajendra Patel, then Jaydev Shukla, Rajesh Pandya, Nazir Mansoori, and Mona Patrawala into English. He won Indian Literature Poetry Translation Prize given by Indian Literature Journal, Sahitya Academy, New Delhi for translation of modern Gujarati poetry in 2000 in the year 2000. He has translation. He has translated fiction by George uh, Louis Burgess, Ted Hughes, and Adam Thorpe into Marathi. He works as a professor in English, Faculty of Arts, the Maharaja Sayajirao University, Baroda. Currently, he is working on a new project, a critical history of Marathi literature. So without further delay, may I invite Professor Sachin Ketkar sir to deliver his talk on comparative literature as a research method. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Prashant. Thanks a lot for having me here. And I really congratulate you for having this very important and good initiative that you have undertaken, especially in lockdown period. And what you have done is you have found opportunities in difficulties.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, had you not taken such initiative, I would not be able to meet all of you at single time in single place. So, this is a very good initiative. And and I also want to thank you for that generous introduction. And I hope I am audible. So,
Yes,
without further ado, I will straight away go over to what I want to say. Uh, what I want to say actually comes from my own research preoccupation from past 25 years. I have been working in the area of comparative literature and translation studies, and I will continue to do so probably till the end of my life. So this is one area where I have learned a little bit, which I would like to share with you, and I hope it will help budding researchers, also advanced researchers can also bring in their insights, and maybe you will find something for whatever you are working on. So I would like to go straight to my presentation that I'm making. So the whole intention behind having this presentation is to equip students and researchers of literary studies to produce more relevant research by bringing together greater clarity and rigor in their own research project. The project that you are working on may be you may be working as an undergraduate or a postgraduate student, or you may be a doctoral or postdoctoral researcher, or you may be just working on a research paper. So this intention and the objective of a presentation is to help you to come up with greater clarity and rigor in your own method, so that it will produce better research, which will help you for your own professional growth and career advancement. So what am I going to talk about today? And you can see that what I'm going to speak about is, I'm going to start out by discussing what is not comparative literature. I'm also going to talk about then what is comparative literature. Then why should we be bothered about comparative literature, or why should we engage with this whole question of comparative literature and comparison. After we have discussed these, I will go over to how, after what, why, we move over to how to use comparative literature as a research method, for which I will be talking about some of the key notions of comparative literature, right? Placing or grounds of comparison, which is one of the most important ideas in comparative research. Then I will also touch upon the questions of quality and relevance in literary studies, because very often than not, we just do things because we like to do them in a certain way, which may not be of good quality or even relevance. And very often people think that quality is a kind of subjective thing. You cannot really measure it. You cannot even say, for example, API is not a good indicator of quality. But as I see it, quality has something to do with relevance to the society and culture that we live in. So I will touch upon these questions. Then I will talk about certain important grounds of comparison, like what is influence, what is reception, what is interliterary processes. Then I will also touch upon post-colonial grounds of comparison. I will also touch upon comparative literature and translation, but I won't go into great detail discussing translation, because you will on YouTube, you may, if you type my name, you will find a video which discusses the question of translation studies at a greater length, which is my primary area of research, by the way. The myth of the death of comparative literature as a discipline is also something that I will touch upon. And towards the end, I will talk about the notion of world literature, something called distant reading, and digital humanities, which are the further directions of comparative literature. So this is an overview, an outline of whatever I'm going to speak about today. So I begin with the first thing, what is not comparative literature? One of the problems that we have with the term comparative literature is that it can be very misleading and confusing, and very often one way to find out what something really is to spell out what it is not. That is how maybe in Upanishads also they talk of neti, neti, not this, so that ultimately you can reach to Brahma. So if you can clearly point out what it is not, then it's easier to understand what it is. So what is comparative literature can be understood better if we start discussing or thinking about what it is not. Comparative literature is not a body or a corpus of literature, like say for example English literature or American literature or Bengali literature. Because when we say American literature, then we talk about set of texts, the histories of American literature. We talk of Bengali literature or Marathi literature. We talk of certain books written in Marathi from certain period. So it is not a set of books that we associate with comparative literature, because it is not a body of literature. Another prevalent misconception is it's not about comparing a text or author in one language with another to point out similarities and difference. Now, this is another default thing that we often do. We just compare two things and point out they are similar and different, which makes no sense, because we know everything in the world can be similar and different. So just pointing out they are similar and different is not comparative literature. The third misconception comes from the negative association we often have with the term comparison. We don't like to be compared with our siblings or our colleagues. We want to say we are distinct, we are individual. So comparative literature also is not an attempt to show how one text or author is superior to another text or author. So these are some of the things which comparative literature is not. So once we reflect upon what it is not, it can lead us to the question, then what is it? Then what is comparative literature? And one of the difficulties of the term comparative literature that it can be defined in several ways. There is no the definition of comparative literature. But if you then go to think about it, there is no definition of what is English literature either, because most of the time we may end up teaching things like Irish literature, and Irish people may get offended if you say that we teach English literature, or Scottish people may feel offended by all these ideas. So what is English literature itself is a problem. So we should be, I think, used to the difficulties of definition, because there are no final definitions, but we can come up with something like working definition of something, which will help us to go further in our quest or an inquiry. And the definition that is provided by a leading comparative researcher is given by Susan Basnett. And she says that comparative literature involves study of texts across cultures, that it is interdisciplinary and is concerned with patterns of connections in literature across both space and time. And what she adds is very interesting. She says that people do not start with comparative literature. They start out with certain national literature very often, or you look and start with a genre, but then you end up with comparative literature. You may select a genre called novel, but if you probe further, then you will find that the novel itself has a history that crosses languages and it crosses cultures. So unlike English literature or Marathi literature or American literature, comparative literature is a historical approach, a perspective, a method of studying cultural texts and forms across cultures, languages, and nationalities. And it is also a discipline of producing such knowledge using this method. So this is a rough and very useful way to understand what comparative literature is all about. So it's method, at the same time it's a knowledge that is produced by the method. Like science is both method as well as a knowledge that science produces. So it is both methodology and approach, as well as it's a body of knowledge that is produced by it. There is a very agonizing long debate about what is comparative literature, whether it should be there or not, what is history, and all these things I'm not going to basically focus upon, because I personally feel that most of the time they are waste of time. So if this is what comparative literature is, then why should we? Then there is another question that comes up, that why do we need comparative literature at all? There are scholars like Ben Hutchinson who have pointed out that knowledge itself is comparative. How we read, how we write, comparison is hardwired into the very ways that we think. So he quotes George Steiner, who says, to read is to compare. If all knowledge is comparative, if all activity of reading invariably involves comparison, then why do we need a separate discipline called comparative literature at all? So that is another area where people may have confusion, that why do we need something called comparative literature? Because we compare all the time. Even if we are studying one national literature, even then it involves comparison. So why do we need it at all? And this is my answer to it. We need comparative literature because we are all trapped within certain restrictive nationalist frames, like American or Canadian, or we are trapped within linguistic and regional frames, like Marathi or Bengali literature. Our own discipline, that is English study in India, introduced by British colonizers, is still deeply monolingual, Eurocentric, and Anglophone in its orientation. While India, as a social and cultural reality, is a deeply multilingual society with a diverse and distinctive cultural tradition. So there is a mismatch, a historical mismatch between monolingual English studies, which became a kind of model for all other literary studies. For example, we talk of Bengali literature or Gujarati literature. All these are modeled after the idea of English studies. And that's why all these monolingual disciplines have, there is a mismatch with the multilingual realities of the society. And in order to address this mismatch, we need something like comparative literature. This is my take on the whole question. And I would like to go into a bit more further. We need comparative literature approach because historically no literature grows in isolation from other literatures and culture, especially in the age of growing interconnectedness. As we are sitting here, there are people from across the subcontinent who have logged into it and listening to it, and they come from various cultural histories. There are histories of migration and interconnectedness. And with the COVID-19 breakdown, as we are experiencing it, something starts in China and entire world comes to a halt. This is the age of globalization and interconnectedness. And we cannot then conceive of things in isolation in such contemporary social situation. Let's look at English literature, something that all of us, most of us have grown reading, studying. We started out as students of English literature, but we cannot understand English literature without knowing Greek and Latin heritage common to most of the European literature. And so most of the times when we started studying English literary criticism, we started out with Plato and Aristotle, who are Greeks. They were born and they wrote when there was no such thing like English existing. So we have to acknowledge the fact you cannot understand Elizabethan theatre, Shakespeare or Milton without knowing the classical ideas like that of Aristotle or Seneca. If we don't understand Seneca, we don't understand Elizabethan theatre. We cannot understand Elizabethan poetry without knowing something about Italian poet Petrarch. We cannot understand Restoration comedy without referring to the French drama. Nor can we understand English Romanticism without knowing the French and German philosophers and writers. Similarly, one cannot understand Gujarati or Marathi literature or Tamil or Bengali literature without knowing something about classical Sanskrit works like the Bhagavad Gita, the epics, or the notions of ras and alankar. You cannot understand Marathi or Gujarati literature without knowing something about Shakespeare, Wordsworth, Ghalib, Kabir, Sarat Chandra, Rabindranath Tagore, Ibsen, Chekhov, Baudelaire, Eliot, Brecht, or Kafka. So we have to engage with this international authors and their oeuvres to understand what is local and regional. So even if we are looking at something which is national or linguistically delimited, we cannot study it in isolation. Besides, Indian society has always been linguistically and culturally diverse, and multilingualism and translation is a way of life for us. Hence, comparative literature is a way of decolonizing the monolingual Anglophone orientation of English literature and making English studies more relevant to Indian context. So this is my take over why we need this subject at all. So we have touched upon what it is not, what it is, and why do we need it. So if we are in some way aware of these things, we can start now looking at what is involved in comparative literature as a method. And when we say method, then it's a method for research. And very often we are not very aware of methodologies involved in research. A very interesting book recently has come up by Gabriel Griffin called Research Methods in English Studies, which makes a distinction between techniques, methods, and methodology. So techniques would be the specific skills like close reading or a distant reading, which I will talk about. Method would involve how you are going to do it, the how of your research. And methodology involves larger ideological or theoretical framework that you are going to use. You are going to look at gender, caste, or what are you going to look at? So these are the things that we keep in mind as researchers. So one traditional method of comparative literature involves what the British comparative researcher called S.S. Sprower has called placing. Placing involves putting two things together, two literatures, two languages, and by doing so, we create new meanings across cultures that lead to mutual illumination of several texts or a series of texts considered side by side. The greater understanding we derive from juxtaposing a number of frequently very different works and authors and tradition. So by just placing two things together, we are aware, there is a different kind of awareness that we are left with, new kind of knowledge that placing two things together provides. However, the rationale and objective behind placing the research question or the argument, the point behind placing is even more important. Why do we place two things together? For me is far more important question than just putting and comparing similarities and differences. So the whole rationale behind comparing one thing with another is what is called the grounds of comparison. Any activity of comparison involves the third term, or what is known as tertium comparationis. That is Latin for third part of comparison. So if you are comparing two things, then there is always a third thing that is involved in any comparative act. So if you are looking for, you are comparing several models of your mobile handset, then there is one more thing that you keep in mind. Say, for example, your price, how much you are willing to pay. What are the features that you are looking for? So all those features or questions of price is called grounds of comparison, the reason why we compare. So let's look at the whole idea in greater detail. For instance, look at a very famous comparison here. My love is like a red, red rose. And that's a very famous lyric by Robert Burns, I guess. My love is like a red, red rose, newly sprung in June. So what is the ground of comparison here? The ground of comparison is the third term, which is neither love nor red rose. It is the third term is maybe freshness, maybe the naturalness of love, or maybe passion and intensity, but also probably how ephemeral it is, right? Which is common to both the things, love and rose. So that's the whole point behind comparison. Now, this is what we mean by grounds of comparison. Very famous comparative scholar Feng Qian points out that ground of comparison is therefore both empirical and objective basis from which comparison begins, as well as the interest or principle of reason that motivates each particular activity of comparison. And this is what is to be taken away from this whole discussion of ground of comparison. The quality of research depends on the importance or relevance of your grounds of comparison. And this is how I define quality in literary research. It's a question of relevance and importance of your ground of comparison. Even if you're comparing a film adaptation or a series, web series adaptation with the novel, it's irrelevant what you are comparing. What is more important is why you are comparing. What is the ground of comparison? Merely empirical ground of comparison are often trivial and unimportant. For example, merely pointing out similarities and differences in portrayal of Draupadi or Karna in Malayalam and Indian writing in English is a trivial comparison. The quality, as I said, depends on relevance. So stories of Draupadi and Karna raise several issues for gender, sexuality, and caste histories in India. So if you are trying to explore how vernacular representation of Draupadi or Karna differs from Indian English representation, what you are doing is, asking the question, what are the historical, ideological contexts of this representation? You are asking questions that are relevant to Indian society. So immediately you are asking questions. The question is called ground of comparison, which is relevant to the society in which we live. You are also contributing to further understanding of social and cultural histories by doing this of vernacular Indian societies, which is underexplored domain of knowledge. The term vernacular needs to be slightly discussed because very often people think that it's a language of slaves. But vernacular implies a language situation of inequality, where there is one major language and there is other marginal language that is considered inferior. And interestingly, English language is vernacular in England or America. So we shouldn't be ashamed of using the term vernacular because German, French, Italian are vernaculars. But in Indian context, English would not be vernacular, but an elite language of the powerful, language of aspiration, language of power, language of wealth. So vernacular indicates a language situation rather than a specific kind of language. It's not derogatory as some people think. So grounds of comparisons are also the objects of the discipline. And that is what makes comparative literature a very fluid category. As a discipline, it does not have any fixed object or any fixed ground of comparison. Like say, for example, natural sciences or biology. Because of this lack of fixed and permanent object of study, the discipline has become dynamic, interdisciplinary, and broad. It also stands to lose because it does not have any fixed object of study. So if you ask a student of comparative literature, what do you study, then there won't be any clear-cut answers that he would be able to give, which makes it a very tricky situation. Now let's look at certain very traditional grounds of comparison. And one of the most well-known ground of comparison is to seek influence of Shakespeare on some Marathi author or Seneca on Shakespeare and so on and so forth. The influence studies is one of the key features of what was earlier known as the French school of comparative literature. However, the problem with the notion of influence when it's used to explain similarities between literature, that it creates a kind of hierarchy between the text from which something comes and the receiving culture. So when we speak of influence of Shakespeare on Gujarati theatre, we retain the secondary and derivative status of Gujarati, where Shakespeare and English is the original and hence superior, while the Gujarati theatre is considered inferior. So the model of influence studies retains this hierarchy, and hence it's a problem. At the same time, it's very positivistic, means it's based on empirical research. You find similarities and all that. And it's also very romantic because romantics talk about the whole idea of genius and originality, the ideas which were not so prevalent in Indian society before English education came here. We were not we didn't make big deal about originality. And originality is a romantic idea, and there is no such thing like originality. Okay, the other ground of comparison is reception studies. The notion of influence was later replaced by something called reception studies, where the focus was on the context of cultural history of recipient culture. Hence, it would focus on the reception of Shakespeare and how this reception shaped the existing theatrical and dramatic traditions and conventions. Say, folk theatre like Bhavai in Gujarati and Tamasha in Marathi and Sanskrit drama already existed here. So when Shakespeare came here, how did it shape Gujarati theatre or Marathi theatre? And at the same time, it also asks how reception of Shakespeare altered the way the theatre was perceived or conceived. Or to use Hans Robert Yau's term, how Shakespeare was received within the existing horizons of expectation, and how this reception created new horizons of expectation. So what we are basically doing, first we try to understand what ground of comparison is, and then we have started looking at various grounds of comparison, the rationales that we are offering as students of comparative literature. So first was influence, this is reception. The third important ground of comparison comes from a very famous Slovak theorist called Dionysius Durizin, a theorist and his ideas who I work with extensively. And he takes what is known as process view of literary studies instead of product. So once you start looking at literature not as products but as process, the whole idea of originality disappears. Means if you look at the process of making tea, then it involves various ingredients like milk or sugar or whatever else that you're adding. Now, all these ingredients are not seen as original influences. It's not that sugar is original, milk is original, and tea is derivative. It's that tea, while preparing tea, you took something from some place. So instead of influences and reception, we are focusing on ingredients that have gone into making of a particular thing. And a very important idea that he proposes is the idea of interliterariness. So literary processes are also interliterary. So there involves a kind of historical connection in certain cases, like Ghazal in Marathi came with the Persian-Arabic contact. So there is first kind of interliterary relationship, which is called contextual relationship. And there are literary resemblances which are not brought about by contextual relations. For example, people have drawn parallels between Shakespeare's Winter's Tale and Swapna Vasavadatta or Uttar Ramcharit. They have compared it to show the great similarities. Now, there was no connection. Shakespeare did not read Uttar Ramcharit. He didn't even know about such thing. But even then, there are resemblances, so which are called analogical or typological relations. So Durizin uses interliterary processes to overcome what he calls vulgarization and one-sidedness implicit in the idea of influence or causality. It's not that Shakespeare caused Gujarati theatre, right? And he emphasizes something called factors of autonomous individuality. So comparative literature, he stresses, is the necessity of taking into account the determining principle of selectivity existing in each recipient element. So by doing that, he is stressing the agency, cultural, ideological need of recipient culture. So in that way, he maintains the autonomy of receiving cultures, which the idea of influence does not. Because once you say that this is a derivative and copy of Shakespeare, you are taking away autonomy of that Gujarati or Marathi or Punjabi text. And that applies not just to transmission between English and Indian languages, but also between Sanskrit and Bhashas. More recent are post-colonial grounds of comparison, where the ground of comparison is colonial history and its influence on Indian society, modern Indian society. That is the ground of comparison in comparative literature. So I see post-colonial studies as not something that has displaced comparative literature, but it's just shift in the grounds of comparison, because post-colonial studies inevitably uses the binary between colonizers and the colonized, and two societies and two cultures. And for example, more Orientalist way of working with post-colonial study would look at how colonizers' project of representation of the colonized I'm sorry, in the form of literary knowledge and discourses served the political project of colonialization. So that is one way to do post-colonial studies, is to look at the representations of the colonized and how these representations are political, how they fed into the project of colonialism. So this is the Orientalist way. There is another way of doing it, where how you look at how colonized cultures like Gujarati, Bengali, Tamil, Hindi negotiated the colonizers' discourse and culture in shaping their own modernity, and examines colonialism and the forms of colonialisms within the colonized in the form of caste or gender discrimination and oppression. And this is what you very often find in subaltern studies school. So these are several important grounds of comparison that we use. Let's look at then one of the most important questions in comparative literature is the question of translation. And very often translation in India, even today, is thought of from very traditional perspective of whether translation is possible, translation is good, or translation is bad, or translation is possible at all or not. There is no such thing like equivalent. So all this discussion on translation that we find in India most of the time comes from a very conventional way of understanding what translation is. So we need to rethink what translation is. We need to redefine our perspective on translation to make study of translation very contemporary, fruitful. And André Lefebvre, one of the most important figures in translation studies, has pointed out that the place of translation has been marginal in Western comparative literature, largely due to the romantic ideas of originality and genius, and also due to Platonic and Christian view of translation as inferior or derivative. And we all are familiar with Plato's view that art is a copy of a copy of a copy. Then translation would become copy of a copy of a copy one more time. So it's 4 times removed from reality, thus making it more inauthentic than the original. So this Platonic view of art has actually done a lot of damage to translation. The Christian view of translation is also very negative, means the Tower of Babel, and it's seen as God cursed man, and that's why there are multiple languages, and translation becomes a kind of necessary evil. Also because we see translation as involving tampering with the sancticity and of the original. So because of all this cultural, civilizational, metaphysical underpinnings, translation has been marginal to Western literary and cultural studies. So how to overcome that? And interestingly, in India, we did not have this kind of, we did not have Platonic thinking or romantic thought. But even then, we have not really engaged with translation very seriously in India. So Lefebvre proposes 3 fundamental distinctions that any researcher should make for researching translation. The first distinction he proposes is between translation and translating. That is, whether researcher is translating, studying translation, or is doing translation. Whether one is studying the end product of the process of translation, or the process of translation itself. And all these distinctions that he gives, if you want to research translation at all, then you have to decide what you're doing based on this distinction. So you have to decide whether you are studying translation or you are studying the process of translation. The second distinction that you have to do is whether you are taking a normative and evaluative approach to translation. Are you judging translations to be good, bad, right, wrong, or you are trying to describe translation? And one of the examples that I often give in most of the time give in the class is the very famous translation of unto this last given by Gandhi as Sarvodaya. Now, it's not a very good equivalent. So if you take a normative and evaluative approach, then you end up making very stupid remarks that Gandhi's translation is not a faithful translation of Ruskin. So we need to ask more important question than whether translation is faithful or not. We need to ask more questions about cultural histories involved in that. And then we realize that Sarvodaya is one of the most important translation of 20th century. It influenced the nationalist movement in the beginning of 20th century. And it's the cornerstone of Gandhian politics and ideology. The third distinction is between analysis of translation and producing translation. And very often we don't do that. And most of the time we don't ask questions that are we studying a poem or are we studying how to write a poem? Most of the time in the classroom, we don't teach how to write a poem. We teach how to study a poem. We don't teach how to write a novel, but to study a novel. So similarly, we may not teach how to translate, but we may teach how to study translation. So the traditional study of translation is largely process and practice centric. It's evaluative, while the contemporary approach to translation is towards product. It's more product centric and descriptive. So this brings us to the whole question of the death of discipline. And this is the term that we have often heard. And very often people talk about how comparative literature is dead. And one of the most important scholars who proposed the whole idea of death of the discipline is Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, who talked about how comparative literature is dead. So what she actually means is that the traditional Western Eurocentric grounds of comparison that has dominated the Western academia, that is dead, which is actually even not true. But she is making more of a kind of rhetorical point here. And she then goes on to make a proposal for new comparative studies, that is, that takes on the board new Euro-American, non-Euro-American planetary grounds of comparison. So comparison between, say, for example, Punjabi and Sindhi literature, for example, would be non-Eurocentric grounds of comparison. Susan Basnett is another scholar who has talked about death of comparative literature, and she provocatively says that relationship between comparative literature and translation studies are almost reversed. So what has happened, according to her, is that translation studies is the primary discipline and comparative is seen as subordinate and subsidiary. So she says that the term comparative literature should be replaced by translation studies. So that's the position she has taken. So now let's look at the more recent contemporary developments in the comparative literature. And one of the most important development is the notion of world literature. Now, idea of world literature is as old as Goethe and Marx, and the idea was reinvigorated with the collapse of Berlin Wall in 1989, because somehow we started now thinking of world as an interconnected, globalized space, the global village, as the cliche goes. Right. So the idea of world literature becomes a prominent notion, and it's rethought from what it was earlier being thought after globalization, after the collapse of Soviet Union. The traditional meaning of world literature was either it was thought of in quantitative terms, like all the literature in all the languages of the world, if you gather it, the huge corpus that you have is called world literature. Or it was thought of in a quantitative and canonical manners, like masterpieces of world literature. That's the name of many books and syllabus and curricula across the world, that we teach masterpieces view of world literature. But contemporary theorists of world literature, like David Damrosch, rethinks and reformulates world literature to encompass all literary works that circulate beyond their culture of origin, either in translation or in their original language. So work only has an effective life as a world literature whenever it is actively present within a literary system beyond its original culture. So if you define world literature as those texts, those modes of reading and modes of circulation which are outside the culture of origin, then we are discussing world literature. For example, Sarat Chandra Chattopadhyay is seen as a Gujarati novelist, even before Sahitya Academy was ever invented. So Sarat Chandra is a major presence in Gujarati, in Marathi, in Hindi literature, right? So Sarat Chandra, then we would be able to understand Sarat Chandra as world literature. Or we cannot think of any modern Indian literature without thinking of Rabindranath Tagore, for instance. So all these figures who have played an active role outside their languages in which they wrote can be considered as world literature. So Ghalib wrote in Persian and in Urdu, Hindi, but then he's a major influence across the world. So you are no longer taking a Eurocentric view of world literature. You are taking non-Eurocentric view of world literature. And David Damrosch claims that world literature is not an infinite, ungraspable canon of work, but rather a mode of circulation and of reading, a mode that is applicable to individual works as to the bodies of material available for reading classics and the new discoveries alike. And it's also about mode of reading, which is very interesting, because literary criticism, as we understand it today, is certain way of reading literature, something that existed in Europe. It existed to an extent in Sanskrit, but not so much in Indian languages, non-Sanskrit Indian languages as a practice. So literary criticism in India is a form of world literature. So you are able to look beyond the canon, but you are also able to look beyond literature as a set of canonical authors. So the idea of world literature is thought about in several ways. There are various models of world literature existing, and Damrosch is just one of them. You have Pascal Casanova, who talks about world literature as a space. It's a kind of space in which the text circulate, which is produced by a global capitalist world literary system. And you can see on similar lines, you have Franco Moretti, who has argued that literature around us is unmistakably a planetary system. That is one and unequal. It has core and periphery. So European literature are still at the core, especially in English. But the question, what is very interesting in Moretti is that he says that world literature is not, then the question is not what you should do, but how you should study this world literature as a planetary system rather than as a book or as a text. So if you start looking at world literature not as an object but as a problem, then we need a new method to engage with or solve that problem. And this is where Franco Moretti believes that the new method required to read a system that is planetary and the archive that is almost infinite cannot be close reading, because you cannot read how all the books that are published. And very interesting example is we say in our conventional classroom situations, we read Jane Austen's novel and say comment on the cultural context of Jane Austen. But that's only one novel that was published in 1830s or so. Well, there were other 10,000 novels that may have been published over a decade or so. Then why do we select just one novel and consider it as a representative text? So the whole method of close reading is very often connected to the idea of canon. So he says reading more and more is never going to solve the problem. You are never going to read 10,000 novels in your life and research them. So what we need is a different mode of reading and studying the text. And he said the trouble with close reading in its all incarnations, from new criticism to deconstruction, is that it necessarily depends on extremely small canon. At bottom, it's a theological exercise, very solemn treatment of few texts taken very seriously. So we are looking, according to him, at a very small data set. So the conventional way of studying literature involved very small data set, and it's inevitably canonical, because you are saying this small set of text is a representative sample of the thousands of text novels that were published in that time. So you have to now get over it, because if you start looking at world literature, then you will never be able to read all the books in your own language. Forget reading all the books written in the world. So Moretti argues that in order to deal with the global system, and I'm coming to the end of my presentation, is the great unread of almost infinite archive of world literary texts. We need a new method of studying literature, one that relies on other people's research without direct single textual reading. Means you are also reading criticism about novel in Chinese language, secondary research. So you're not directly researching Chinese literature, but you're reading criticism on Chinese literature. And very often you may also use computing technology using massive data of digitized text. This method is what he calls distant reading. He says that distant reading, where distance is a condition of knowledge, it's about distance from the original archive, allows you to focus on units that are smaller or larger than the text, devices and the themes, tropes or genres and systems. I will just talk about this very quickly because we are running out of time. And as an example of what is distant reading that he says. So he selects one problem as ground of comparison. And that problem is that novel as a form evolved all over the world. There was one basic problem common to all novel systems of novels across the world, and that problem was you could not fit the local regional material with the Eurocentric form. So there is a mismatch between form and the content that you find in novels all across the world outside the Eurocentric core. And this became his ground of comparison and hypothesis. And then he went on to study all the secondary materials written in Chinese, Japanese, whatever, which he calls distant reading, and puts it together to validate and confirm his own hypothesis. So you can see it's a very new way of studying literature, which is global. So this is more recent ground of comparison, and it involves very often may involve digital computing to read massive data sets, something which is called digital humanities these days. So these are several works that you may find useful to probe for. These are not the only works, but works which I have cited in my work. So this is where I want to stop. I have spoken for too long, but I really want to thank once again Prashant and Langlet for having this very good initiative. At the same time, I want to thank him for having me here. I want to thank all of you for listening to me so long. So I will be very happy to take questions if we have time and Prashant permits.
Yes, yes, sir. Most welcome.
Yeah.
There are a few questions in Q&A.
Yeah, so
Sir, can writing a history of Shakespearean works translated into Marathi language be considered as a comparative literature?
Well, that is what I said. It is definitely comparative literature. So you are looking at translations, you are looking at it involves two cultural systems, right? So how is text from one? So you are exploring what is the role played by Shakespeare in development of Marathi theatre. And so it's a comparative act.
Sir, there's one more question by Sangeeta Ghodke, ma'am. Can we compare theories of colonial and post-colonial critics and do research?
Pardon, can you come again?
Can we compare theories of colonial and post-colonial critics and do research?
Yes, definitely. You are saying colonial and post-colonial theories. Now, what are your grounds of comparison? Because very interestingly, theory of literature in colonial period itself is a comparative thing. we did not have such theories. What we had was Sanskrit Kavya Shastra, which is not the same as theory. Shastra is a manual about how to do certain things, while theory is more like explanatory framework, right? So if you are talking of literary criticism at the colonial period and how it changed, then you will have to come up with grounds of comparison. Like, why are you comparing these two? What are the arguments you are trying to make? Are you trying to say that after independence, India tried to decolonize literary theory or what? So it all depends on what you are looking for in comparative literature project. So rationale and the grounds of comparison for me are more important than what two things you are comparing. I hope I answer the question. Yeah.
Could you please throw light on Urdu and English literature in the context of comparative literature?
As I said again, what two things you are comparing for me is not very important. Why you are comparing and what are the arguments you are trying to develop, what are your grounds of comparison is important. For example, if you are developing an argument saying that Urdu literature was shaped by English in a major way in the 19th century, and the modern forms in Urdu, like Urdu novel, emerge out of colonial encounter, and what you are going to study is the mode of reception of those forms. So if you are clear about your grounds of comparison, that will make your project sharper and grounded.
Sir,
yeah.
What will be the future of comparative literature in Gujarat? Asked by Achyut, sir.
What is the future of comparative literature in Gujarat depends on the academics in Gujarat, right? Very often. But so it depends on the researchers, what they are doing. But for me, I think comparative literature has extraordinary future because that's the way that we can move ahead to produce research that is relevant to our period for us as people. So it definitely has relevance. So it's going to be very good, either for Gujarati or for any other languages in India. Can I take this Q&A given in the chat box?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. So the one question here is, we are talking about originality and genius. Isn't the idea of using Shakespeare in Gujarat itself is original? No, people would have researched it, and people who translated Shakespeare for the first time into Gujarati have compared it. So you are not doing something very new, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but originality itself is not a big value in my view. What is more important is why Shakespeare is important to Gujarati theatre is because it reveals the colonial mode of negotiation and an encounter, and how that resulted in producing modern theatrical and dramatic practices in Gujarat. So it explains that. So that is the ground of comparison which makes it very important. So question is not whether something is original, but important and relevant. That is my view. The third question here is, in translation, the languages are different, but feeling is the same. I am not very sure about that. I am not very sure of that. Because language and your emotional world are deeply interconnected. So, shall I compare it to summer's day may evoke certain emotion for a British person stranded in British winter. But for Indian, it will give rise to a different kind of emotion. So language are different. Very often they come up. For example, Urdu literature gives rise to certain kind of ghazaliyat, which cannot be captured in Marathi, however hard you try. So you have to come up then with Marathi ghazaliyat. I don't know if I have answered this question. Can two forms films?
There is one more.
Yeah. Yeah. Please do.
Art and literature.
I can't hear you clearly.
Can art and literature be compared?
Very much. In fact, I didn't touch upon many things in this very short time. Inter-artistic comparison is a very important field of comparative literature where you study paintings and literature. You study poetry and music. You study cinema and novel. You study short story, and so interartistic comparison is a very important aspect, especially in American school of comparative literature. So I think even Manjula's question is related to, can you compare Devdas movie with Devdas novel? But then, as I said, it's not about what you compare, but why you are doing it in the first place. What are you trying to argue by comparing Devdas movie with Devdas novel? So these grounds of comparison for me are more important than whether you can or cannot, or whether you should or should not. I hope I'm clear in what I'm saying. Then there is Nayar Jahan's question. Dr. Jahan asks, given that original work of translation, art and translation are two genres of literature, whether you put translation in where you put translation in hierarchical form, for me it's even more important than original at times. Translations create ground for original works to emerge later on. Elizabethan age was an age of translation to start out with, and then you have a Shakespearean outburst. So till Petrarch was translated and the genre of sonnet was anglicized, Desified, then it created the later outburst of great sonnets in Elizabethan period. So for me, translation comes first and original comes second. I don't know if you like that answer. Is European literature similar to comparative literature? It does, because by European you mean multiple languages and traditions, and they have a shared history of classical past and also political histories that they share, ideas of nation, modernity. So if you want to study European literature, you can only do it comparatively. Then Faisal Bana asks, sir, could you throw some light on Urdu and English literature? I think I've done that, right? So how do you go about, what are your grounds of comparison is the important question. And more relevant and important your ground of comparison is, better your research will be. So you can also compare Urdu with Tamil, why not? So what you compare is not primarily a very important, what you place together. So what are some areas of comparative literature? Literary history is one area. Genre studies is an area. Thematology is one area. So there are several areas. Interartistic comparison is an area. Translation studies is an area. So you have a full range, and I have touched upon some of them in my presentation. You talked about comparative literature deals with cross-culture. Can it be said that it deals with, media, definitely so. Again, as I said, what two things you put together is not so important as why you are putting it together. So if you're putting a web series adaptation of very famous one that I came about, I forgot, by Vikram Chandra's novel, The Sacred Games. So for me, it's not important what you are putting together, but I'm interested in why you are putting them together. What is the ground of comparison? So how good your research is depends on how good your grounds of comparison are, rather than what two things that you put together. Kachhi Lokvarta written in Gujarati, which is originally from oral tradition. Now that is very interesting and complex question. He is asking, can you consider folk literature in Kachhi written in Gujarati language as comparison? And this is precisely what we need to explore. And this is precisely where the Eurocentric paradigms fail us. Because literature for us is orality and performance. It's Sahitya and Vangmay, which includes both spoken, performed, visual. So the definition of literature itself has to be understood comparatively. So I cannot give any easy answer to this, but I can just give you pointers. Achyut Tilawat asked you the question which I have answered. I think art and literature, painting, I have answered. Why do you compare painting and a poem? So what would the ground of comparison be is a research question. It can be anything. It depends on how well you are able to articulate it and lay it down for yourself. For example, if I'm comparing painting say for example, based on Jaydev's Geet Govind, the whole Ragmala, and so why am I comparing these two practices? What are the grounds that are put together? So one argument that I can make is that both draw upon certain theory of aesthetics, like rasa and bhav, for example. And both these traditions engage with other cultural traditions. So that's one way to look at this. If I'm not African American and Dalit are often takes. So what do you think? It's definitely means you share, and the grounds of comparison is oppression and discrimination. Something is considered as natural, like caste is considered natural, race is considered natural, but actually it's a social and historical construct. So you can take race and caste as comparable things. Subaltern studies definitely looks at representations and repressed and marginal voices, as in African American. So it can be definitely grounds of comparison. If I want to connect particular theory of leadership by using neuroscientific principles, keeping literature in base, can it be considered as interdisciplinary comparison? Interdisciplinarity is something that I have not discussed at length in my presentation, but that is the key feature of comparative literature. You draw upon various knowledge traditions, political science, economics, history, sociology, and many other things, media studies. So comparative literature is inherently interdisciplinary, but your question, I think, is about neuroscience principles. I am not theory of leadership, neuroscience principles. I am not very familiar with these ideas myself, right? But I am not very convinced about this project because it requires a lot of rigorous understanding of neuroscience, which in India you cannot do it in a kind of casual fashion. It's a rigorous domain of research. So I would be skeptical about your own expertise in neuroscience. Whether I should take you seriously as a neuroscientist at all, for me will remain question. And theory of leadership, and how are you connecting three different things together? What is your rationale in bringing these things together? For me, is not very clear. Yeah. Yeah.
He wants to ask you, can the study of translational novels for common ground be considered comparative literature?
Pardon, come again. I didn't get you.
Takes his question to you in the chat.
Yeah. Acha, what is it? The question? Is it Shampa Chakravarti's question?
This is just take first.
The question of worth. Is that the question?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, the question of worth. Now, worth is an evaluative thing. So, who decides what is worthy or not? What decides what? Shakespeare is worthy, definitely. But then we are asking questions about evaluation. Values cannot be studied outside their ideological, historical, social context. What is worthy in 19th century is not worthy today. So, when taking up text for comparison, worth cannot be ground of comparison. It has to be something more important than worth, like history, like the questions of discrimination, gender, whatever. Then there is a question here which says language acquisition play an important role in literature. Language acquisition is about acquiring languages. So without you acquire languaging, how will you have literature? Right? So unless you have language, you can't have literature. But I don't know what do you mean by the question at all. Question itself is unclear. Can we compare novels in Indian literature with novels in regional literature? I fail to understand. Do you mean Indian literature in English? I'm talking about Jalali's question. And that is a very interesting question for me, because what is Indian literature? And what you are saying is Indian literature in English. So you can see here that English has got an inordinate prominence due to historical, political reasons. For us, Indian literature is that which is written in English, while rest of the things is regional literature. So you can see a hierarchy working between English and regional here, right? For me, Indian writing in English is a marginal practice. Only 10% of people know English, but they hog all the limelight. So I have a problem about formulation of your questions, Jarali. I am doing comparative study of Indian tribal and Australian aboriginals and looking at through green post-colonial yeah. So I think it's very interesting. So you are bringing two things together, and you are asking questions about representation. You're also asking questions about modernity. You're also asking questions about environment. So I'm sure this is very relevant to us. It's a good project. Any other questions apart from the ones that are asked?
I think no, sir. You have answered all the questions.
Okay.
Sir, so thank you very much, Professor Sachin Ketkar, sir.
It's my pleasure, and I do really wish your initiative well.
Informative, insightful, and enlightening session on comparative literature as a research method. With your lucid language, you have thoroughly explained what is comparative literature, what is not comparative literature, why there is necessity of comparative literature, how to use comparative literature as a research method, important grounds of comparison, comparative literature and translation, and in addition to that, you have clearly explained what word literature, distant reading, and digital humanities. In fact, we thoroughly enjoyed and learned a lot from your session. Thank you very much, one and all.
Thanks a lot, Prashant, for giving me a chance. Yes. And thanks all for listening to me and those very interesting questions. Thanks a lot.
By logging Zoom and those who are watching on YouTube channel and made this lecture series a grand success. Let's learn, unlearn, and relearn together. Stay at home, stay safe. Thank you very much for
Yes, so I wish you all the well for your health and well-being. Please stay safe.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. I'm leaving the meeting, right?